Hi guys, I have a new true crime video for you, and today we're going to be talking about a case that dates back to 1979 when a young woman was abducted from her workplace, tricked into thinking she was going to a surprise party, and was then assaulted and murdered. I'm not gonna lie, this case is pretty disturbing. There are themes of sexual and physical assault, so please, if that is something you're not in the space to hear about right now, please click out of this video and I will see you in the next one. This case is pretty insane. It was actually a case that went unsolved for nearly 3 decades until September 2003 when a Hope College film class decided to make the victim the focus of their documentary. So the victim that we're going to be talking about today is a woman named Chandler. And Jeanette was described by her friends and her family as someone who was very easygoing, very happy-go-lucky, but also very devout in her religion. She grew up in a very religious Christian household, and most of her friends and her family were a part of the church, so this was something that was very important to her in her life. At the time of her murder, Jeanette was 22 years old, and she herself was studying at Hope College and majoring in music. So just like a lot of other university students, during the daytime she would do her studies, and after that she would then go to work to make some extra cash. Jeanette, in the evenings, would actually work at a place called Blue Mill Inn, and she would work there as the night clerk. And on January 31st of 1979, thinking that this was just going to be another normal work day, Jeanette clocked into work and started doing her own thing. Unfortunately, this would turn out to be the last night that anyone would ever see her alive again. On February 1st of 1979, so the next day, a snowplow driver was clearing the highways of South Haven, Michigan, when he found something that seemed a little bit suspicious. While driving, his headlights had caught onto fresh tire tracks that ran along the road, but then swerved off into a wooded area next to the road. So this was suspicious because, well, it was 1 a.m., it was a freezing cold and snowy night, so the weather conditions weren't ideal for people to be out and about, and he just thought that there was something wrong about the situation. And luckily, with his gut feeling telling him that something was off, the snowplow driver decided to investigate further and to follow the fresh tire tracks into the wooded area. And as you can probably imagine, what he found there was shocking. Poking up out of the snow was an arm and part of a torso, and this would turn out to be the only visible portions of a nude body of a woman that was later identified as Jeanette Chandler. It is a big relief that her body was found, but I honestly do feel a little bit bad for the snowplow driver because I can't even imagine the fright he had experienced during that time, just driving around at 1 a.m. doing his job and then finding a dead body. That definitely must have been shocking. Anyways, Jeanette's body was found 40 miles away from her workplace, and it was deemed to be a homicide. For several months after her body was discovered, the local police officers did talk to a lot of her family members, her friends, her co-workers at the Blue Mill Inn, and even guests at the Blue Mill Inn. They even compiled over 1,000 pages of notes on this investigation. And this investigation did bring up a few interesting things. And one of these things being that on January 31st of 1979, the same night that Jeanette was abducted and murdered, someone had actually called into the local police station saying that Jeanette was abducted. But before I get into the details of who this caller was, I think it's going to be super useful for you guys to get a little bit more context as to the situation that the town was facing at that time. And at the time of her murder, Jeanette was living in a town called Holland, and this was in Michigan. And Holland at that time was going under some turmoil. So back in 1979, there was a company called Chematron that owned a paint plant in Holland, and the workers at the paint plant decided to go on strike, and the situation was getting pretty ugly. So the company, Chematron, decided to hire in security personnel from all over the country to provide additional security during this strike. And most of those men, about 80 of them actually, were housed at the Blue Mill Inn. So the guards that were living at the Blue Mill Inn were known to be pretty rough guys. They really like to party, and they also really like to hook up with motel staff. From the outside, the motel looked just like any other regular motel, but on the inside, there was a lot going on, and we're gonna get into all of that very soon. But first, let's talk about Jeanette's situation. So Jeanette, during this period, had already moved out of her home, and she was living in an apartment that she was sharing with a woman named Lori Swank. And Lori was actually Jeanette's boss from the Blue Mill Inn, and was also someone that Jeanette thought of as being one of her best friends. So before moving to live on her own, or with a roommate, Jeanette was said to have lived a really sheltered life. For example, Jeanette's parents wouldn't even let her sleep over at her friend's house if it was known that her friend's parents drank alcohol. Again, they were very strict and very devout Christians. After graduating from high school, she even enrolled in nursing school, but quickly dropped out of nursing school after experiencing the wild types of students that she encountered on campus. In 1974, after having dropped out of nursing school, Jeanette then enrolled into Muskegon Community College, where she was a conservatively dressed freshman student who wasn't prepared for all the college shenanigans that was going on campus. But soon enough, as she had a little bit more time to adapt to what was going on around her, she started to really push the boundaries of her upbringing. It was during this period of exploration that Jeanette then had her first sexual encounter, and at this time she was 17 years old, and the man that she had this encounter with was a middle-aged man. It was said that twice a week she would sneak into her parents' house to have intercourse with this man. And this man, in an interview way later after Jeanette's passing, actually expressed a lot of regrets about what he had done with Jeanette. He did say that he had regrets over how he had taken advantage of Jeanette and how young and naive she was at that time. But the reason that I was even sharing this information with you guys is because it was a real turning point for Jeanette. This relationship ended up being sort of an awakening for Jeanette, and she soon realized after doing this that God wasn't going to send her to hell for just having a little fun every now and then. And I think that this experience was super important in helping to shape her and her decisions in the years to come. Also guys, just a note, please, if you have any comments that are about her decisions, sexually, please keep those to yourselves. We're not here to shame anyone for their decisions. Everyone is entitled to do what they want to do, except if you plan on doing something like not cool, like murder or any of that stuff. Then in that case, that's not cool and you should be shamed. But other than that, let's try to keep those kind of comments to ourselves on this channel, okay? Glad we got that out of the way. Anyways, Jeanette still remained pretty religious. I mean, she was beginning to explore a little bit more with her sexuality and all that jazz, but she still really respected her religion, and it was still a very important aspect of her life. She also remained a very good daughter to her parents, and also a very good older sister to her younger brother. Her parents had absolutely no idea about this change in Jeanette's life, and they couldn't have imagined that their devout Christian daughter was living a much darker and more complex life. However, her younger brother did notice that Jeanette did change quite a bit over the years, and especially after working at the Blue Mill Inn. He just assumed that Jeanette was beginning to experiment more with more adult things, such as substances and dating and all those other things, and he was correct. Jeanette's old roommate and boss, Lori Swank, also said that Jeanette and herself had indulged in numerous affairs with different guards at the Blue Mill Inn. She even went so far as to say that the affairs got pretty crazy. Laurie even had to reprimand Jeanette one time because she was caught having activities with one of the guards in a room suite that was meant to be a display suite. There was also another instance where Jeanette was confronted by one of the maids in the motel for having slept with that maid's partner at that time, who was also a security guard from the security personnel team. This apparently was a big major fight, and it was heard by a lot of different people because it happened in front of guests and other co-workers. It turns out that Jeanette had called the boyfriend of the maid and had told the boyfriend to come and meet her at the front desk ASAP. And when the boyfriend got to the front desk, Jeanette was waiting for him there, fully naked, and escorted him to an empty room where they engaged in activities. Needless to say, the maid was not happy to find this out, and she confronted Jeanette in front of everybody, and it turned into a screaming match. So yeah, it was a pretty big drama in the motel at that time. So all of this drama started to really piss off Laurie Swank and the head of the security team, whose name was Arthur Paiva. Arthur wasn't too happy about the fact that Jeanette was sleeping around with various men on his team, but this was also kind of hypocritical because Arthur had actually slept with Jeanette as well. What's interesting is that Laurie was supposedly dating Arthur at that time, or maybe not dating, but they had something going on. And it seemed like Laurie was starting to get a little bit jealous of Jeanette. She was starting to get a little bit jealous about the fact that Jeanette was getting more attention, or maybe even just jealous that Jeanette had slept with Arthur. So to spite Jeanette, Laurie, already knowing that Arthur was already pissed, decided to go to Arthur and to tell him about all the things that Jeanette was up to in the most recent months. And needless to say, Arthur was not happy. So with all of this going on, the people in the motel started to develop a real hatred towards Jeanette. And this was when both Arthur and Laurie decided to come up with a plan that would take Jeanette down a few notches. So this is when they started to hatch out a plan that would involve humiliating Jeanette. So let's go back to the call that was made to the local police station on the night of Jeanette's murder. This call was made by one of the men on the security team, and his name was Robert Michael Lynch. So on the night that Jeanette was abducted and murdered, Robert Lynch had called into the local police station and had claimed that he was on the phone with Jeanette when suddenly somebody barges into the motel front desk area and tries to rob Jeanette. Another witness who was at the hotel on that evening had also claimed that they had seen Jeanette being whisked away into a Jeep type vehicle. So initially, when the local police did arrive at the motel, they did treat this case as a robbery and abduction because they did find $500 missing from the motel's office. However, the next day when Jeanette's body was found, this quickly changed to a homicide case. Unfortunately, despite the call from Robert and the witness statements, no real leads developed from this, and eventually the case went dead, and it remained dead for nearly 3 decades. However, as I did mention in the beginning of my video, all of this did change in September 2003 when the Hope College film class decided to make Jeanette's case the focus of their documentary. With this film, they had hoped that they would be able to re-jog people's memories, remind people of who Jeanette was, and maybe potentially unlock some new clues. I think the documentary was a pretty big hit because it did successfully nudge the chief of police in the town to haul out the old files and to reopen the case for a new investigation. A new detective was also assigned to the reinvestigation, and this reinvestigation was led by a 45-year-old veteran named David Lanvopic. Raised in the same town as Jeanette and remembering this to be one of the most notorious crimes to have happened in his hometown, David was really committed to figuring out what had happened on that night. And when the investigators were re-interviewing people who were involved in the case 30 years ago. The very first person they wanted to speak to was the person who had made this phone call, so Robert Lynch. So after the strike was over, Robert began to build a respectable life for himself in a town called Three Oaks, which is 80 miles south of Holland. It was there that he opened a beauty school with his wife and where he started to raise his 2 children. Robert has a son who's become a successful contractor, and he has a daughter who's not much older than Jeanette when she was murdered. Investigators said that Robert from the outside looked like he had the perfect life, but there was something about him that seemed off. During the reinvestigation, Robert was now 65 years old, and at this age he was drinking pretty heavily and drinking a lot of hard liquor every single day. It was almost as if he was trying to drink away some bad memories. It took the investigators several visits until they began to get anything interesting out of Robert about what actually happened to Jeanette at that time. However, in June 2005, Robert did claim that he and Jeanette were intimately involved with one another. He said that the 2 of them would meet up in a dark and vacant house and hook up every now and then. And then, after months of refusing to really talk about what had happened, Robert dropped a bombshell. Robert had claimed that around the time of the murder, Jeanette had been at a party with some of the security guards and that the party had gone haywire. At this point, the investigators have been talking to Robert for over a year now, and this is the first time he's ever mentioned anything about a party. However, Robert, realizing what he has just said, decided to clam up and not mention anything else about it. However, about 11 days after this bombshell, the investigators did do a follow-up and went back to Robert's house, and they found him sitting outside on his bench on his porch in a very reflective mood. And the investigators did open a conversation up with Robert, and in this conversation, Robert mentioned that he had done a lot of things that he regrets in his life, and that some of those things he couldn't and didn't want to think or talk about anymore. But then when the investigators tried to pry him for more information, he then clammed up again, and they couldn't get any more information out of him. Luckily, the investigators knew that there was something here, and they remained persistent with this case. They, over the next 3 months, continued to visit Robert regularly and to attempt to get more information out of him just through conversations and check-ins and follow-ups. And one day, one of these investigators during their follow-ups decided to have Robert watch the documentary on Jeanette. And there's this scene in the documentary where Jeanette's father can be seen holding back tears. It was at this scene where the investigators decided to pause the documentary. It was then that the investigator then turned to Robert and said, just look at this. Like, you have a daughter. You have a daughter that is Jeanette's age. If she were killed, wouldn't you want to know what happened to her as well? And Robert just stared at the screen, and then suddenly he just broke down. And with Robert's confession and further investigations into the relevant parties involved, they began to slowly piece together all the details of what had happened to Jeanette on the night of her abduction and murder. So on the evening of January 30th of 1979, it was a pretty snowy night, and Jeanette was just arriving at the inn to begin her shift. That was the same night that Jeanette was confronted by the maid for having slept with the maid's boyfriend. And apparently it wasn't just the maid who was upset. Lori and Arthur were also pretty upset, and that was the night that they decided to teach her a lesson. And to teach her a lesson, they decided that they would be creating this surprise party in order to humiliate Jeanette. In his confession, Robert stated that he was in his bedroom at 2 a.m. on January 31st when suddenly his phone rings. The man on the phone said that he needed Robert's help to lure Jeanette out of the motel's office, and that the plan was to take Jeanette to Arthur's guest house and Arthur was staying separately from the rest of the security guards. He had his own place on the grounds of the Chematron plant. So when Robert went down to the lobby, there was another security guard down there with Jeanette already, and the security guard had told Jeanette that they were planning to take her to a surprise party to honor her. Robert said that Jeanette didn't seem to mind when he himself had put gauze over her eyes and the other security guard had sealed it with duct tape. And after she was blindfolded, the other security guard then walked her out to the vehicle that was waiting outside to take her to the guest house that Arthur was staying at. Robert said that he didn't follow Jeanette and the other guards to the party because he actually had to be up early the next day to work, but he did have a pretty good way to cover up the abduction. Before the other security guard had left with Jeanette, he had told the security guard to take some of the cash with him and that they would stage this as a robbery. And this is when Robert decides to call the police and to set up the scene as if Jeanette had been robbed and abducted. Robert then decided to go back to his room, go to sleep, wake up for his shift, and at 6 p.m. the next day, as he finished his shift, he decides to go to Arthur's place to see what is going on. So this is when things get pretty chaotic and disturbing. Robert arrives to Arthur's residence to find Jeanette sitting in a corner on a cushion with her hands bound and duct tape over her mouth. Everything that's happened between the point of her leaving the motel and up to when Robert gets there is unclear, but I think we have a general idea of what had happened to her, and yeah, it's really disturbing. So when Robert saw Jeanette, he said that her eyes were really glassed over and he had just assumed that she was on substances. However, her autopsy did confirm that there were no substances found in her system. More likely, she was in a state of shock. Robert said that there were several men and women just drinking and dancing and enjoying themselves at this party, and one guard even tied a belt around Jeanette's neck. It was at this point, after having tied a belt around her neck, that they took Jeanette to a bedroom, and it was there that she was assaulted. And during this assault, Robert said that Laurie could be heard screaming over everybody, calling Jeanette the B word. Alright guys, just another note, things are going to get even more disturbing from here on out, so please do keep that in mind. A lot of people, including a person that Jeanette had thought of as her best friend, were all there watching her go through this horrible experience and cheering on her abusers. And while all of this was happening, Arthur decided it would be a good idea to start taking photos of the assault and of the people involved in the assault. He wanted these pictures because he thought that they would be good insurance for himself and to ensure that no one at this party and no one involved would ever speak to investigators or to anybody else about what had happened. So he was essentially using these photos to protect himself and to blackmail other people involved. So Robert Lynch was the person who ultimately ended Jeanette's life. While assaulting her, he had grabbed hold of the belt that was around her neck and grabbed it too tightly, and he ended up killing her. When Robert and the other people began to realize what had happened to Jeanette, they all panicked and everybody started trying to clean up the crime scene, and the plan had been to dump her body in a snowbank 40 miles away from the guest house. And that was where her body was discovered by the snowplow driver on February 1st at 1 a.m. in the morning. Arthur made it a point to tell every single person at that party that he had taken photos of them all. If anybody was to talk, they couldn't do so without incriminating themselves as well. And for nearly 3 decades, this was enough to keep anybody from talking. The people who were involved in her death actually had the audacity to show up to her funeral. Laurie Swank, the so-called best friend, also went to the funeral, and after the funeral, she then moved to Pennsylvania and became a nursing assistant. And as I mentioned before, Robert ended up getting married, moving to a different town, and opening up a beauty school and raising a family. As for the other security guards involved, the strike at the plant did end, and this meant that they could all go home, so they all dispersed all over the country and for nearly 3 decades, no one was arrested for the death of Jeanette Chandler. And if it wasn't for the Hope College film class and their documentary, I think that this case would still remain unsolved. However, 30 years later, some form of justice was created for Jeanette. So Robert gave up the names of everybody involved, but investigators were really shocked to hear that Laurie Swank had been involved in Jeanette's murder. They were really shocked to hear that she was cheering them on during the assault. And when investigators finally confronted Laurie, she did break down and admit that she was involved in the murder. She even agreed to testify against the others in exchange to be allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. So the names of the men that Robert had given up during his confessions were Arthur Paiva, Freddie Parker, Anthony Williams, and James Nelson. And Robert and Laurie did testify against these 4 men. One of the key moments from this investigation was when the investigators went to Arthur's place, and there they found the photos. And with those photos, along with Robert and Laurie's confessions, the investigators were able to build a pretty strong case against the men involved. Another person who testified at the trial was actually the maid who had confronted Jeanette for sleeping with her boyfriends. The maid, whose name is Cheryl, did say that at first she was pretty happy to see Jeanette getting punished for what she did, but that she had no idea that the night would go so far and that Jeanette would end up dead. During this trial, Cheryl claimed that for years after the murder, Arthur and the 3 other defendants would show up to her house and remind her by threatening her life to not ever speak about this or that she would end up dead. And so for almost 30 years, she never said anything to anybody except her parents. She told her parents about what had happened that night, and her parents had told her to keep quiet because otherwise she might also get arrested. By the end of this trial, Arthur was found to be guilty of first-degree murder, while the other 3 defendants were found to be guilty of second-degree murder. And all 4 of them were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Robert was allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for his confession, and he also confessed to being the one who had buried Jeanette's body in the snowbank, and he was given 25 to 40 years in prison. Laurie also pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, but in exchange for 10 to 20 years in prison. During this trial, Arthur and the other men involved did try to claim that they were not there that night and that they had no involvement in the assault or in the murder. They even tried to frame it in a way that it was absurd that they were even being accused of this crime. But luckily, the witness testimonies were enough to put them away for the rest of their lives. So yeah, this brings the case to a close. This case was actually one of the most expensive cases in Michigan history. It costed about $2 million to investigate and prosecute. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. But yeah, it's incredible that after 30 years, this case was finally able to be brought to a close, and Jeanette Chandler's family was able to gain that closure. I'm sure that this is something that they will probably never get over, but at least now they have closure on as to what actually happened to their family member. So I am glad that they have that closure. My heart breaks for Jeanette, who will never have the opportunity to live a full life and to have a family and a career, but my heart also breaks for Robert's family. I can't even imagine being his children or his wife and finding out that person that they loved and probably looked up to did this horrible thing. That must have been really devastating to them as well. There really was just so much pain involved for so many different people in this case, and I just want to encourage you guys to make good decisions. Please just try to remember that your decisions do have an impact and that they won't just affect you in your life, but they will affect the others around you, including the ones you love. You might not think that they will affect anyone you love now, but they could certainly affect the people that you love in the future, like in Robert's case. So please always think about the consequences of whatever actions you're considering and just make good decisions. All right, guys, that is the end of my video. It is getting dark here because I've been filming for hours now. It took me so long to film this. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that story, and I look forward to doing more videos like this. Hopefully the next video will be a little bit less disturbing. I know that All of these true crime videos are all pretty disturbing, but there are some that are just a little bit more chaotic and heavy than others, and I think this was definitely one of them. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I really appreciate your time. If you like this content, then please click like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in my next videos. Bye!